Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Sarah Colada with Architecture Talk Tank. We're going to talk a little bit about the business side of architecture for a change. And my guest today is Luciano Landaeta, who has a really impressive track record of working for big offices on various projects, from urban planning to architecture, and recently has shifted into business development, which is a very fascinating journey, and I'm looking forward to deep dive into this conversation. But before we do that, I just wanted to invite all of you guys to Disrupt Symposium, which is coming up 1st to the 3rd of November, only 2 weeks to go. Super exciting. We have absolutely tremendous speakers this edition, headlining from UN Studio Ben van Berkel and Architectonics Vinka Dabudam, and we have leaders and C-level executives from big architecture practices coming to speak about practice operations. So if you are interested to join, go to disruptsymposium.com and get your tickets. You can see the full lineup and the program. And if you have any questions, you can just drop us a message through the chat widget. And we do welcome you to get in touch if you are looking to bring your team, your office into Disrupt, because we have discounts and special deals, and we can also invoice you directly. So just get in touch with us straight from the website. And coming back to this, Luciano, thank you so much for joining me. And perhaps we kickstart it by you telling us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, it's quite exciting, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation, thinking of me as
It's a pleasure.
Contributor to your series, which is, I think it's like a continuous, I've been tracking and continuous conversations about how the architect has amplified it recently. But yeah, I'm an architect. I've been working for this for like the last 25 years in different regions. And so I've been probably refounding myself from South America, where I'm originally from, and then the US, then China, basically Southeast Asia, and then Northern Europe, and now a little bit Middle East, UK type of bridge.
So you've been all over the place.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's been kind of like a spiral of architectural hardcore, and basically how probably now it sounds like an old school, right? 1997 was one that very absolutely impact of OMA or just to call one, Stephen Hall, that I ended up working with on the rethinking about the urban space from the architecture. It was very disruptive, using your term, on how does the street says much about than the building itself. So that was kind of like a key moment, a trigger that I put my attention to. That was absolutely, I'm still quite influenced about the architecture of the public, if you will, and different categories on infrastructure, transportation, mobility that later on, 20 years after, we echo into. So that's how I work in large scale buildings or master planning. Very few residential, to be very honest with you. So that's what the whole experience of urban architecture, kind of like a reverse the terms, yeah, planning into architecture somehow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. So it sounds like you worked mostly in the role of a designer on all these projects. So when did the business development come in play? How did that story develop?
That's great. Yeah, I think it was a kind of like a time where when you relocate yourself from the U.S., specifically in China, and it wasn't wasn't a culture shock. It was more the communication values that you put in front of the client. I have a couple of anecdotes that I want to share with you on one of the first meetings that I have, and I put my sketches on renderings. I was really kind of like highlighting shadows, for example, right? We're like, oh, this is how the building's going to react to the environment, etc. And the client was like, what is that black thing in the building? That's a shadow. Like, we don't have that here. So those are small elements, like, right, how to compress attention span on elements that you really want to portray, and then communication, and then narrative. There was a click on, okay, it's about design, but it's about the values they want to portray. Mr. Klein, you might need more public realm. People's going to come for A, Y, and Z reason. You might have a community next to you. You want to actually engage rather than neglect it. So it was a realm of different open eyes on different elements that create added value, something that was very new in my vocabulary, rather than my beautiful building is an iconic one. and that will create a kind of recurrency of the client coming back to that speech and coming back, different clients, and coming and very, very reactive into the sense like you have a compressed dialogue or effective. So from the design, from the narrative, from the presentation, and then of course that's a sales speech in a way, right? Because you're really true to your belief, and automatically it can be the strategy being the bad guy in the design board computer, right? And put it in front of that because you were establishing or you were asking questions on long-term or future-proof ability for the project to resist 15, 20, 15 years, etc. That opens the door to that. Okay, this is a value maker for that we can thrive through, and of course that have an appetite to keep running in that construction of possibilities. Nowadays I call it decoded urban opportunities, because you have really to subtract elements that might turn into something special for the client, or unique, or destination, or surroundings, for example. Yeah,
I love this. So have you always been sort of bringing these experiences of architecture and urban planning into business development, or it just kind of ignited at a certain point in your career?
that's a brilliant question. I think it's been kind of like a cherry picking in the whole 25 years, I guess. The exposure, as I told you, of the urban or metropolitan, what does it really mean? 1990s, and how to evolve into what if I actually get a little more contextual elements and responses. But that sounds very encapsulated to the process, almost like into the studio, like nobody talks about it unless you put it in front of the client. And I guess I took advantage of the clash of cultures and languages, right? I needed to curate my language better. I need to really to demonstrate their essential moments of that. By doing so, I'm probably not trying to repeat myself, by doing that's a frontliner, and you're gonna get some preferences from the clients or contracts that might equal the needs. So you might actually notice that I'm changing my vocabulary here, right? So values, needs, I would say flows and leads that you might pitch to one person that you want them to be the client, but it's not going to react automatically. You have to wait. You have to harvest that thing. It sometimes takes time. You have, for me, that I wasn't a native Chinese speaker, that have to learn the language a little bit. Even that wasn't, like getting that sense of confidence. And out of the sudden, when they kept this thing spinning around their head, they're going to pick up the phone or the emails like, that's what you told me. I need it now for maybe another project. So it's kind of like a slow cook sometimes. This thing of the magic. I think we have this effect probably on the competitions. There are fantastic opportunities to demonstrate your skills, but that's kind of like a blast and an instant blast. But business development, it turned into be a little more communication skills and attention to cultural details and context and how things works. That we can probably just scrap more in the conversation later on. But those elements, I use it really as a secret weapon on engage people into the values that you want to portray, right? So I'm going to use my previous experiences in Perkin Eastman's or even Calatrava or even in Fuchs's recently, that it's much more what you actually got to send across. And that's what it's going to create. It's not about the branding, which is a separate story. It's about, once again, how do you establish a long-term relation with your friend, client, or vice versa. Could be the same at the same time.
Yeah. You speak in your profile about integral approaches to business development, and I found it really interesting. Actually, titled this conversation such. Can you expand a little bit on that, and perhaps you have a good example of it through your work?
Right. Yeah, I don't think it's actually a monolithic strategy. Like follow this I don't know, template. You're going to be successful right away. If from across the bar, if you have your boutique studio or your corporate practice, you really have to. I think time is one of the key elements, and what does it mean for you as a leader of the studio or as a company or the principal of any corporation? Like, do you want to grow, and what does it really mean? Like, is that revenue based? Is that reputation based? Is that market based, which is totally different? Or is that skills based, and you want to address technology as part of your ethos in the whole group of people? One of the best things I have experienced is bringing people not necessarily related to the field of architecture, not necessarily designers. So expand the conversation on technologists, for example, right? Or people in the market, like they produce carpets, or they produce veneers for the facades. It's like or even financials. I kind of like change my literature a little bit into what's going to happen and how does it work in the world of intangible currency, for example, and how to describe such a, like, because that molds the needs of the spaces that we actually deliver to the client. So let me be very straightforward to your question. Integral means that you have a regional or cultural, I call it the soft powers of where you stand in. I mean, I've been in situations that I was working in Shanghai, but actually I was doing a project in Colombia, for example, at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. So, well, that's my kind of nature realm, especially for the language purpose and culture. But I was far away in time from Latin America back then. It was like I have to relearn and rewire myself to how to present to the city of the major theaters of Bogota, a competition that we won. And what I cannot bring my Chinese strategies to plug back into Colombia at all, zero. So cultural approach is one of them. You have to decode it, you have to write it down, you have to really be diligent and put it in black and white to make it tangible, to make it really your base of action. The second one is, who's your audience, right? Because that will tell the narrative of things that you actually want to create. Is that public realm? For example, in Scandinavia that I work in Sweden, it's much important to not to convince the client of the developer or even the city. It's a community that has the power to approve things. Mm-hmm. What do they really need? Are you really paying attention to that? Are you establishing a certain kind of connection? You're not selling, you're engaging, which is different, right? You need to be part of that and trust in that. So the second tier is, who's your audience somehow, and even if you want to strive, and how actually do you have the ability or capability to deliver what you're promising, right? I mean, is that an airport that you want to do, or a community, or roads, or infrastructure, or actually the opposite? You just simply want to deliver a system methodology. So I think if you combine the three of them, you will be able to establish a kind of like an action list of methodology that will put yourself in the region. Understand, you have to read quite a lot, like what has been the history or the context of that place in recent years. If that's what you do and want to participate, you want to burst that market differently, should be attractive enough for them to be considered, right? Yeah, that has been a little bit like the soft skills that I've been putting myself into, like sitting there, talk to them, having a coffee, and calling again, and create this kind of like a spiral of communication that will bring you into that. Sounds a little bit abstract, but it's totally worth it. Mm-hmm. And then you show your portfolio. Only that. It's not because it's not important, but it's actually assurance of your expertise, if you want.
Yeah.
If you're young, you start and you show your portfolio of ideas, right? You can sketch them. Like, I mean, you don't need a client to be an architect, do you? Sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the language you use, because a lot of times their clients, as if they, they already speak all this architectural jargon. And
Right. But yeah, in a sense, what I meant specifically was like you can collect. You have to be very systematic, and you, I mean, everyone, I mean, myself, I've been hitting the wall many times. So the more systematic you are, and you record things, and you write it down, and you get your strategy down. That gives, and I'm going to close that idea on when you presented let's say a proposal, a request for proposal, RFI, which is very technical. I think the front line and the main pages should be how do we see these things, not from the design standpoint, like how do we create something that involves community, client, city, whatever you call it, into something that you're one piece of that larger mechanism, rather than create ideas that I tell you how to do it. That nowadays doesn't work. You need to help yourself with experts of narrative and communication. That's fundamental. You need and so some people actually from detach from the industry a little bit to get to make a little more that as an object, put it in black and white lines and describe and be impeccable in your speech and be very solid and concise. That's really I would like to underline that one. You have to be really straight to the point with no fear. There's this like, I mean, the worst thing you can receive is a no now, and maybe you try it again later, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You touched a little bit about the systems, and you spoke about the importance of being systematic. Where can one start with this? I mean, some of the things I asked you whether you've always been interested in business. I find that even though some of us generally are born with a little bit more of an entrepreneurial element, it needs to be, it's also an acquired skill. And usually what ignites that sort of interest is a certain type of passion or curiosity that you mentioned at the beginning of this interview as well. But not every architect that is committing their life into design and research and wanting to solve the world's solutions through building better solutions is interested in business. And a lot of times that aspect of business is actually a bit of a burden, that takes us away from designing and doing what we love, and is that sort of necessity that needs to be combated just simply to bring clients and to do with all that. But I think that, a very important element is to learn to be systematic, and, strategic planning can feed into that, and also, the way project management and budgeting, but also a lot of other elements of business. And so what is your advice on this? I'm guessing you've also learned business before you started working as a business developer. So
Wow.
where is the strategy and the systematicness coming from,
Right.
and how can we, as architects, kind of open up to that a little bit more to learn?
Well, another brilliant question that I'm just going to open a little more personal journey, right? So I
Sure.
guess it has been based on failures rather than success, right? So it's that inability to communicate ideas in the first time, right? I feel like I mean myself or whoever, I'm a great designer, but I don't get across my drawing board or my Rhino. I know I can do better. I know I have done better than this and this and that. Look at that solution, this architect. I mean, we have the tendency to overcritique somebody else's work, but at the same time, we refuge ourselves in that design discourse, which is fantastic, and you nurture and then you elevate yourself, you educate your vision, your all your skills. But something that, as a system, we should be able to record our process to get how far I'm going to go for. Try to pitch your design on a phone call, right? So with very absolutely non-visual resources. And this is something that I did to myself. Like, I'm going to convince somebody, call it, and try to get this through a conversation. How much of architectural language am I using, or how much universal language to get somebody else that is not really in my field can understand what I'm saying? That's a terrifying exercise to be done. But at the same time, it liberates yourself from nobody's going to judge you. You're not going to get the Pritzker Prize in that phone call. You just want to send an idea that's going to create some kind of enthusiasm by the other to understand. Maybe you may have an idea that's not necessarily a figure illustrated exactly as you do. And by doing that, you may filter your language in a good way. You make it a little more universal. And without compromising my design, because I to be very honest, I feel proud in somehow in gratitude of all the working experience I ever actually have been exposed firsthand. But that doesn't necessarily leads to the design and business skills that need to be nurtured at the same time. So narrative and language is something that we all have to practice very, very much. So, I mean, we should read beyond the beautiful pictures and renderings. We should be reading thing. So we educate ourselves to get that one. And the second, probably based on failures, is this thing on expanding your circle of I mean, architects are actually surrounded by architects and rings of architects all over.
Yeah, true.
Um, what happens if you really want to listen to somebody that's not in your field, right? And you really absorb what I was actually trying myself to get engaged in those gatherings. Was like, okay, what can I bring to this conversation? This is not going to be architecture, right? and for example, the design of economy, and which sounds very abstract and scientific and very foreign to our, happens that affects us much more than we think. And what if you understand a little bit of the market move, not necessarily going to the stock market in New York City or whatever, but economy, it might actually define cities. You might go to Frankfurt because you know that's a little more boosting economy, currency, bank, industry, and etc. Or you might go to this place. So you might start to pairing knowledge into things that you might translate to your own experience, right? So when I was in Shanghai for almost 7 years, and I need to go to the remote outpost in Chongqing and China, what do I need about that city that actually I can just engage with the client or the people that was actually receiving me? And that's built another language. And actually the benefactor of that was myself. Like I could get engaged with that one, right? So second, another interest moment of failure was like, how much time do I dedicate to sketch or render things that probably I can do it in substantially less time with few tricks, right? So then you establish to get a storyboard of your thing that you're doing. Sounds very silly, but it's actually absolutely important that you manage your time to encapsulate the idea. It doesn't matter necessarily, like you really like all-nighter, or you can do 20 minutes. Quality worth it. I'm very obsessive with geometries and quality. You can say like X Calatrava, X Fuchsas, but at the same time, that ability to make it a little bit, I wouldn't say faster, but efficiency. Working with efficiency might help it to understand how we're going to get this story told in 10 slides. Once again, looking here, communication, right? So, and probably the last one with the answer to the last part of your question for personal experience is, how do I educate myself to claim that I was actually in business development area? You really, and this is a hardcore, probably the learning curve is a little bit steeper, is you really need to understand the whole argot on how does the industry works somehow, right? Like beyond the competition. So what is a PQ? What is a RFI? Not because they're actually any kind of matrix or formula, but there's a language and there's a need and there's a system, and you have probably created certain kind of like delivered systematically delivery on those requirements, which is the mechanics, right? So you have to have, if you have the luxury to have a team, but if you put them together and you establish your own sequence on public or private sector or competitions and things, that is, because there's nothing more terrifying if you don't know what you're getting exposed yourself. Like if you get in the door of a fantastic project where you have to fill these forms that, I don't know, for X government, and you want to participate, that's an opportunity to go to the next level in your office, but you don't know how to do it. Probably have to learn and read it more and educate it, which is, it actually doesn't, you don't lose being less, I'm going to be a designer the rest of my life, but it happens that I use that organization spaces skills and kind of like pay attention to the narrative and design that I have to translate that into assets that I really want to send across to the client. I'm not better than the other one. I'm just simply bringing something else, or I believe I'm truly obsessive belief that this is what I actually do the best, and I can contribute to X, Y, and Z project, this scale or that scale. I mean, it doesn't matter. That is important. And the last one, which is a little more intangible, is you have to be a people's person. You really have to. Somehow we are terrified in knowing somebody or break the ice on even different languages. Like how much of that will bring you a benefit. So on getting like a ping pong out of the leads that I do, I try to do 100 leads a year. I might get back 10 out of those, which is a good ratio, right? So you inseminate that conversation about what you do, what you have done, what the actual needs are. You create a certain kind of point of interest, and you mix and match conversations. And I'm gonna go without boring you that I was in a top of Sweden in Umeå, a teeny tiny town, and comparing the needs of that city with mix and match that type of exercise. What is this city is about, and what do you need? How do you retain population? Which projects actually you're going to invest and get your budget into annually? And your cities compared to, I don't know, Leipzig in Germany, or Austria, or Linz. I'm sorry. So if you put yourself, if you have the ability to understand this is urbanomics, how do you compare things if you're talking about cities or larger impact of things? That only happens if you really go transversely into economics or financials or needs, or you have to get your radar out there. And it's like, okay, when's the next major urban transformation happening? And why this is happening? Who's this talking about? So at the back, this exercise requires a lot of like attention to the move on urban growth, for example, and you need to be on the radar and then really take notes of things and compare the notes to get through to be efficient. At the end of the day, that's what it is. The people that's actually going to bring and send you an email to select you, right? You, your team, your thoughts. I think it's the same thing. Right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Luciano. It was lovely to hear your story and advice as well. A lot of good takeaways. So tell me, what is next for you?
That's great, and thank you, Sarah. I think what is next for me, I'm in a professional point that I just want to turn into more strategic thinking. What do I mean by that? Is blending, and not separately, but blending as much as I can, business development into business strategy, right? So I can expand my clientele into cities, more interested to be an advisor for cities or larger private developers, and that's what we are at the moment. We call it the pre-planning before the project lands, which just allows us very quickly to work with all the architects. Right? So you have the larger piece of master plan or an idea, and you can call for colleagues and create a nice group of interaction. And so no competition, but actually contribution.
I love this.
Exactly.
That's a good one. On this note, thank you so much. Thank you also to the audience for tuning in and your comments. And if you're still watching and or even seeing this past this broadcast, I do welcome you to check disruptsymposium.com for the upcoming Amazing Business of Architecture event taking place 1st to the 3rd of November. And we welcome to stage absolutely incredible offices to speak about their practice operations and topics of business development, communication strategies. And this particular upcoming edition is quite tech heavy. We welcome managers and directors of BIM and design technology. So we're going to talk a little bit more than at the last edition to the topics of technology and how that can contribute to a value proposition and business development. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's 2 weeks to go. So don't wait. Just go to www.disruptsymposium.com to get your tickets. Thank you so much, Luciano, for joining me.
Sarah, appreciate it. Thank you for the time. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.